Hello everyone, I am Bhavna and I am an intern from MNR Dental College. Today I'd like to talk about ankylosis of temporomandibular joint and its management. Coming to the contents, these are the subtopics which we are going to emphasize more regarding the TMJ ankylosis. Proceeding with the introduction. Ankylosis. What does ankylosis in general mean? It is nothing but the immobility of the joint due to fusion of bones, and according to Greek terminology, it can also be called as a stiff joint. And we can also further define it as the fusion between the cranium and the condyle in respect to the temporomandibular joint. And we can also state that it is nothing but an anomalous bone function where there is excess deposition of bone in an unexpected area. And in India, the incidence of temporomandibular joint ankylosis is quite high and onset is usually seen before the age of 10 years. And with regards to many other surveys and statistical reports, it is reported that the general age distribution ranges from 2 to 63 years of age. Proceeding with the etiology. Trauma is the most common cause of TMJ ankylosis and other joint infections and diseases affecting the joints, direct spread of infection and inflammation, and many other systemic diseases also contribute to the causation of TMJ ankylosis. And this slide provides a gist of all the generalized causes which leads to TMJ ankylosis. And being more specific, the causes are trauma, infections, inflammation, rare causes, systemic diseases, and other causes. And here in trauma, I'd like to add a point on congenital and forceps delivery causes of TMJ ankylosis. Congenital is nothing but when the fetus undergoes some intrauterine trauma, it leads to TMJ ankylosis in infants. That is congenital TMJ ankylosis. And coming to forceps delivery TMJ ankylosis, it is usually caused when the clinician, while delivery, does some improper instrument handling or insensitive techniques which leads to trauma to the child, leads to forceps delivery trauma leading to TMJ ankylosis in future. And the others are hemarthrosis. It can be due to direct or indirect trauma, and condylar fractures which may be intracapsular or extracapsular, and other infections like otitis media, periodontitis, tonsillitis, furuncle, abscess around the joint, and osteomyelitis of the jaw and actinomycosis are some infections which contribute for the etiology of TMJ ankylosis. And inflammatory diseases like rheumatoid arthritis, osteoarthritis, and septic arthritis, which are usually by hematogenous spread, also lead to this cause. And rare diseases like polyarthritis, measles, and systemic diseases like smallpox, scarlet fever, typhoid fever, gonococcal arthritis, scleroderma, beriberi, Meniere's-Rumpel disease, and ankylosing spondylitis, and other causes like bifid condyle, prolonged trismus, prolonged immobilization, and burns. All these factors contribute for the etiology of TMJ ankylosis. Moving forward with the pathophysiology, what actually happens in ankylosis? It's nothing but when some trauma or injury occurs, there is a collection of blood in the joint space. When the blood pools in the joint space, this phenomenon is known as hemarthrosis. Later, as the blood consists of many vascular factors, many inflammatory mediating factors, many clotting factors, it will lead to formation of fibrous bands in that joint space. And later, these fibrous bands progress and leads to some bony consolidation, and we can also call it as ossification. And when the joint space consists of a bony mass or any obstruction, see, for the joint, it's like some foreign body or a foreign particle which is disturbing its functional movement. So, there is a joint space obliteration. The period where the patient complains to us that there is some inability to open my mouth is the point where the fibrous band and ossification takes place. And later, the overall effect is projected as a joint space obliteration. Moving on with the classification, TMJ ankylosis can be classified based on location, that may be extra-articular or intra-articular, and based on the type of tissue involved, it can be classified as bony ankylosis and fibrous ankylosis, and based on the site involved, it can be unilateral ankylosis or bilateral ankylosis, and based on the extent of fusion, they can be classified as complete and incomplete TMJ ankylosis. These points are self-explanatory. And moving on with other classification, it is a Topazian's classification. It is divided into 3 stages. In the first stage, the ankylotic bone is limited to the condylar process only, which means that it doesn't move beyond the condylar process. And later, in stage 2, the ankylotic bone extends till the sigmoid notch. This sigmoid notch is nothing but the S-shaped notch which is present in the temporomandibular joint. And in stage 3, the ankylotic bone extends into the coronoid process. Coming to the clinical manifestations, we are going to look in detail regarding the unilateral ankylosis. Unilateral ankylosis is nothing but the ankylosis takes place on only one side of the temporomandibular joint. And the clinical features which we can see is that there is facial asymmetry, there is deviation of mandible and chin on the affected side, and the mandible has become hypoplastic here, especially on the affected side, and the lower border of the mandible on the affected side shows some sort of concavity. And we can also notice that there is some fullness and roundness on the face on the affected side of the TMJ. And because of the trauma and pain in that particular area, the condylar movements are also affected and crossbite is noticed. In this picture, you can see this is unilateral TMJ ankylosis, and there is obviously facial asymmetry here, and the mandible is deviated and the chin is also deviated towards the affected side, and there is also some fullness and roundness on this affected side. We can see that. Just go through this picture so that you can just remember all the points. Coming to the bilateral ankylosis, it's nothing but the ankylosis takes place on both the sides of the temporomandibular joint. Here we can appreciate that some clinical features are similar like unilateral ankylosis. For example, like inability to open the mouth. And we can see there is a decrease in the interincisal opening. The patient cannot open his mouth properly because his bone is not cooperating with him to open it without any problem. And here we can see a typical bird face deformity. It is a peculiar feature in case of bilateral ankylosis. Do note it down. It can be asked as an MCQ. And we can see receding chin and a narrow maxilla. The neck and chin angle is completely reduced or completely absent, but the antegonial notch is prominent. It is well defined bilaterally. And here we can see a class 2 malocclusion, and the upper incisors seem to be protruded, and hence anterior open bite is more common in these cases. And mouth opening will be reduced, which will be less than 5 mm, or sometimes the patient just cannot open his mouth. And because the patient cannot open his mouth, it is very difficult for him to maintain a proper oral hygiene. His oral hygiene maintenance is being compromised. So we can see multiple carious teeth and bad periodontal health. And these are the pictures of patients who are affected with bilateral TMJ ankylosis. And we can appreciate that these incisors are slightly protruded and the chin is receding, and there is a typical bird face deformity here. And just have a glance. Coming to the diagnosis and investigation. Here firstly, we are supposed to ask the patient for any history of trauma or infection. Later we have to rule out all the clinical findings and just ask him more in detail regarding his problem. Usually patients complain about inability in opening their mouth, and they usually complain about some sort of trauma and pain in that joint area. And coming to the investigations, and why do we prescribe or why do we prefer taking these investigations is that these investigations helps us to confirm our provisional diagnosis. So we can go for OPGs, lateral oblique view, and cephalometric graphs, posterior anterior radiographs, and CT scans. And specifically, OPGs are useful because they give us a complete jaw picture and they help us to compare in between both the joints, especially in unilateral cases. We can compare both the sides of the joints, and which will help us to get a more clear picture about the diagnosis. And lateral oblique view will give us anteroposterior dimension of the condylar mass. And cephalometric radiographs are usually taken to evaluate if there are any skeletal deformities associated with this disease. And posterior anterior radiographs reveal the mediolateral extent of the bony mass. And CT scans are also helpful. They'll help us to know if there are any condylar head fractures, and they help us to locate them. And they also are most importantly used in case of evaluating re-ankylosis. Coming to the radiographic findings. In radiographic findings, we can differentiate properly and appreciate whether it is a bony ankylosis or a fibrous ankylosis. In case of fibrous ankylosis, the joint space is reduced and hazy appearance can be seen on the radiograph. And in bony ankylosis, complete obliteration of joint space is seen. The joint space is completely destroyed here. And the normal anatomy of the TMJ is also distorted. And there is some elongation in the coronoid process, and hypermobility is very common in these cases. This is sequel of untreated ankylosis. It tells us like what happens when we do not treat an ankylosed patient. Here the patient shows normal facial growth and development which is affected, and later speech is impaired and nutritional impairment is also seen because of improper opening of the mouth. The patient cannot open his mouth properly, so he cannot speak properly, and the patient cannot open his mouth properly, henceforth he cannot take good food, and there is some nutritional deficiency which develops in the patient systemically. And respiratory distress is also seen, especially in case of bilateral involvement with severe micrognathia. When there is bilateral ankylosis, the mandible recedes along with the chin, so it leads to micrognathia, hence there is respiratory distress. And obviously malocclusion is seen, and poor oral hygiene as stated previously. It is very difficult for the patient to maintain hygiene, and hence there are multiple caries lesions, and if there are any impacted tooth, they'll even more make it difficult for the patient to deal with that problem. Moving forward with treatment and management of TMJ ankylosis, here the surgical treatment is inevitable. We are supposed to treat a patient with the help of surgery itself because we cannot resolve a bony discrepancy with the usage of drugs alone. Hence it is mandate. And moving forward with aims and objectives which are supposed to be followed during the surgery are: we have to release the ankylosed mass, and we are supposed to create a gap in between them, and we have to mobilize the joint. As immobility is the primary concern of the patient, the mobilization of the joint should be the primary concern of the surgeon. And later we have to create and re-establish the function of the joint, and followed with reconstruction, restoration of the vertical height of the ramus. And we should also take care that we do not leave any chance from our side for the ankylosis to reoccur. Later we have to make sure that we restore the normal facial growth pattern. Last but not the least is that we have to make sure that we improve the aesthetics of the patient and rehabilitate the patient. And these are the techniques for surgical treatment. There are three techniques, that is condylectomy, gap arthroplasty, and interpositional arthroplasty. I wanted to make a point here that most of the surgical procedures are usually done with the help of a preauricular incision alone. Like this incision is enough for us to obtain the maximum accessibility required, and sometimes Popovich's incision and submandibular incision can also be used for fixation of the graft. Coming to condylectomy, this method is usually advocated in case of fibrous ankylosis, where the joint space is obliterated with the deposition of the fibrous bands, but not much deformity is seen on the condylar head. And periauricular incision can be practiced here to perform this. And the protection of the vital structure during the surgery should be the main concern of the surgeon, because it is very important to protect the vitals. And later, after condylectomy, we can do the recontouring of the bone by arthroplasty. And the joint space can be maintained by placement of an alloplastic material. This picture shows the surgical procedure of condylectomy. Here, the preauricular incision is done and the condylar head is exposed, and later the fibrous tissue or the hard tissue which is present there, which is obliterating the joint space, that is being destroyed or that is being broken down. Yeah, and this is condylectomy procedure is being completed, and post-surgically it looks like this. Moving on with gap arthroplasty. Here, the section consists of two horizontal osteotomic cuts and removal of the bony wedge for a gap creation between the roof of the glenoid fossa and the ramus. It's nothing but there is a section of the bone where we are giving two horizontal cuts, and later we break the wedge which is present in between them and create a gap. That is known as gap arthroplasty, and it is used frequently in case of extensive bony ankylosis. And we are supposed to create a gap in between the two bones, and the minimum gap required would be 1 centimeter to prevent re-ankylosis. And this is a picture which shows us gap arthroplasty. Here the preauricular incision is given and the temporomandibular joint, that is the surgical site, is exposed, and later gap arthroplasty is being performed. And yes, after that, this is the final fitting of the prosthesis so that recurrence will not occur. Moving forward with interpositional arthroplasty, it's nothing but we are performing the same gap arthroplasty, but here we are placing a material considered as a barrier in between the both bones so that recurrence is prevented. Here we can maintain the vertical height of the ramus, and usually the materials used or the interpositional material used are autogenous, heterogeneous and alloplastic materials. And this slide shows us the materials which are used in interpositional arthroplasty. They can be divided as autogenous, heterogeneous and alloplastic. Alloplastic materials are further divided as metallic and non-metallic. And metallic material examples are tantalum foil, titanium, gold, stainless steel. And non-metallic materials example are like Teflon, acrylic, nylon and ceramics. Coming to heterogeneous materials, they can be chromatized submucosa of pig's bladder and lyophilized bovine cartilage can be used. And autogenous materials which are used are the temporalis muscles, temporalis fascia, fascia lata, cartilaginous grafts, costochondral grafts and dermis. Just have a look of the slide. Examples can be asked. Later, artificial replacement of the joint can also be considered. It's nothing but according to the patient needs and requirements. They are custom made. They are prefabricated condylar prostheses. They are made up of steel, vitalium and titanium. These are most commonly used for making this sort of prostheses. And fossa liners along with specially constructed TMJ process reconstruct the entire joint. And these are commercially available. Patient cooperation is very much required when we want to undertake procedures like these. And we do have an internationally accepted protocol and a universally followed protocol for the management of TMJ ankylosis. It is most commonly known as Caban's protocol, which was put forward by Caban, Perrot and Fisher in year 1990. They are precisely described in 9 steps, and the first one is early surgical intervention, and next carry on with aggressive resection. It's nothing but a creation of a gap of 1 to 1.5 centimeters for the proper mobilization of the joint, and later we do an ipsilateral coronoidectomy and temporalis myotomy. The reason behind this is that most of the cases are always in association with the elongated coronoid process. So after carrying out the gap arthroplasty, the coronoidectomy on the same side should be carried out. It can be done separately or it can be done in combination with the gap arthroplasty. And here, if after doing this ipsilateral coronoidectomy, if we are successful in attaining the interincisal opening of greater than 35 mm, there is no need to carry out the next procedure, that is contralateral coronoidectomy. But if we do not achieve an interincisal opening of more than 35 mm, we are supposed to perform the contralateral coronoidectomy and temporalis myotomy. And later, we can move forward with lining of the glenoid fossa region with temporalis, reconstruction of the ramus with costochondral graft, and early mobilization and aggressive physiotherapy for a period of at least 6 months post-operatively. And regular long-term follow-up is necessary so that we can keep a check on the prognosis, and to carry out cosmetic surgery if the patient is more concerned about his aesthetics. We can carry out a cosmetic surgery on a later date when the growth of the patient is completed and the patient is ready for other surgical procedures. Coming to the complications. Complications during anesthesia are most commonly faced. Here we should make sure that we maintain the proper airway of the patient so that we go for procedures like intubation and laryngeal intubation. Sometimes, as in this is an invasive procedure, it is very difficult to acquire patient cooperation, but we are supposed to do that. We should prevent airway obstruction due to falling back of tongue. And we also have to make sure that we prevent any sort of aspiration of any blood clot or foreign body during extubation. Complications during surgery are hemorrhage, damage to the external auditory meatus or damage to the zygomatic and temporal branch of facial nerve, glenoid fossa, and all the vital structures in the operating site. Make sure we do the surgery in a precautionary manner. And complications during the post-operative follow-up are infection, open bite, and recurrence of ankylosis. Coming to Fraze syndrome, it is a very important part. We are not supposed to skip this. It is an auriculotemporal nerve syndrome which may follow the surgery of the parotid gland and temporomandibular joint. It is usually characterized with pain along with the distribution of auriculotemporal nerve, and it is featured with gustatory sweating and erythema occasionally. We can see the flushing on the affected side of the face, and to confirm Fraze syndrome, we can perform minor starch iodine test. And for treatment, if the patient have mild symptoms, we can go for commercial antiperspirants and anticholinergic preparations and like glycopyrrolate, but this is contraindicated in case if the patient is having any underlying systemic diseases. We can go for radiation therapy of 50 gray dose if needed. It is usually done in patients with severe symptoms. Where the patient has severe symptoms, we go for radiation therapy. If not, we try to avoid it. And surgical procedures like skin excision and auriculotemporal nerve section and tympanic neurectomy can also be done according to the requirement. Recurrence. Why does this recurrence occur? It is because of the inadequate gap which is present in between the fragments, or sometimes during the surgery if we do not fix the graft properly, that can lead to the fracture and loosening of the graft leading to recurrence. And inadequate coverage of the glenoid fossa also leads to recurrence. Improper physiotherapy, and in case if the patient has high osteogenic potential, there is increased bone formation leading to high rate of recurrence in children. Here I would like to highlight a couple of points which were previously asked in NEET examination. That is, the surgical procedure used to treat TMJ is arthroplasty. The double contrast phase contrast arthroscopy is used to study the joint space. An Alki-Bramley approach is nothing but a modified preauricular approach. And arthrocentesis, this point is to be noted, it is nothing but the lavage of the upper joint space with medication, and it is usually done in patients with severe pain. And this is the end of the presentation. If you like this video, please do like and comment, and do subscribe for more informative videos. Thank you.